Pete Kennedy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
The term food freedom really means local, farm to consumer, direct, without regulation.
But now instead, we've traded that in for a lifetime of pain.
And this country has been run on this cheap food, high healthcare cost paradigm.
Many farmers are just throwing up their hands and giving up.
Big food and big pharma are joined at the hip.
It is devastating for the health and wellness of our communities.
Recently, raw milk has especially been under attack the last few months. This is really part of a larger agenda to cut access to some of the healthier foods we have out there.
I'm just thinking to myself how I'm going to get up and go make a big donation to that Farmer Defense Fund. I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Pete Kennedy, thank you so much for joining me today on Back to the People podcast. I have been searching the United States for the number one farmer defense attorney. And your name came up from many farmers who said, you've got to talk to Pete Kennedy. He's done great work over the years. You served as president of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund from 2008 to 2016. You're a staunch advocate for food freedom, which is a really big issue right now. And you've been part of the legal battles that have shaped the raw milk movement and the broader push for small-scale farming independence. So thank you for that incredible work that you have done to get us where we are today. And I feel like we are now on the front lines of a brand new battle to win, hopefully, this war for food freedom.
Thanks for having me on, Nicole. It's an honor. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think better days are ahead. The momentum is increasingly shifting in our favor from what I see.
Yes. So you're based in Florida, but you fought cases all over the United States. What initially got you inspired to get involved with the legal defense of small farmers and food producers?
Well, I originally got into this through Sally Fallon at the Weston Price Foundation. I'd been a member a couple years, so I approached her and asked her if I could do any work for her. And she was actually taking on Cargill, of all companies. They had a heart health claim for a soy product, and she didn't believe that was right. So she wanted to find it. So I wound up doing a brief for her on that. Finished that. Then next year came back. She said, I'm willing to do other work for you. What do you have? So at the time, raw milk is a unique food, I think, as you know. It's the only food banned in interstate commerce. So the states make up their own laws. With a food, typically, it's the states just adopt the federal regulations on the food, but there were no regulations to adopt with raw milk. So it's a hodgepodge of laws. So she just wanted someone to compile a list of the different raw milk laws in the different states. And so I did. And around that time, there were several enforcement actions happening. So I tried to help farmers out in those various states. And Sally, really more than anyone, was the founder of the Legal Defense Fund. So I compiled the list in 2004. And then, there were several actions I worked on over the next 3 years trying to protect farmers who had the government after them. And then by 2007, Sally, she'd been considering this for several years, but she just thought it was time to form a legal defense fund to protect these farmers. And she found a general counsel, Gary Cox, to take it on. And so that's when it started up.
Wow, Sally, I had no idea Sally was behind your career in this. That's a really big deal. She's a force of nature, isn't she?
Yes, it's amazing. People like Sally, Joel Salatin, it's just hard to fathom everything they've accomplished. I mean, you've heard the saying, if you want to get something done, find someone who's too busy to do it. And that sums up both their work. But they've left a huge footprint, and it's a footprint that's still getting bigger in, both Sally's case and Joel's case.
Yeah, weathered many, many difficult battles. So state and federal food safety laws, you talk to any of these farmer advocacy groups, and they've all been overtaken by the federal food safety narratives. And food safety, of course, is very important. Um, but there seems to be a balance that we need to strike. And it seems like the last few years have been, let's throw out the nutrients for sterility. Seems a bit silly, doesn't it?
This might sound counterintuitive, but I think the safest food produced is locally produced food, particularly unregulated food. And the reason I say that is there are a lot of homesteaders out there. The homestead field is booming. They'd be willing to get into the food business if they weren't regulated. And so you just have this dynamic where, I mean, these small businesses that get into the food business, I mean, if they make one person sick, just the ultimate regulator in their case is the foodborne personal injury lawyer. They can put them out of business with one illness. They feed the food to their own families. If they make somebody sick, they have to face the community. I think those are all factors to one extent or another. The term food freedom really means to me local farm to consumer direct without regulation. If you consider both the aspects of acute illness and chronic illness. I mean, there are foods like raw milk that have been implicated in acute illness, but I've never heard of raw milk being implicated in any chronic illness. You hear and you hear that for pasteurized milk. So it's just a situation where, from the standpoint of overall health, locally produced food is the healthiest food you're going to find.
Yeah, what you just said, I think, is really a key element of the overall debate between freedom and quote safety. Is if you know, it's really fascinating that we're at a time in history in which we will take chronic disease, like the public health world, will take chronic disease over acute disease knowingly. And I think that's very, very problematic because chronic disease spirals, right? It can start in the stomach and, become a neurological issue. And then the neurological issue can, spiral into all kinds of social and behavioral issues. And before you know it, you have an individual who could have otherwise gotten over a foodborne illness as a child, right? Through an acute, maybe there was vomiting, diarrhea, etc. But it's treatable. These acute illnesses are treatable. But now instead, we've traded that in for a lifetime of pain. And that's where the debate, I think, really has to be, because if we don't get to the heart of the debate, we're going to be stuck in this um, argument about the risk of the acute infection, right? But what we have to really talk about is the risk of chronic illness and how it perpetuates such struggle and such pain, such suffering, such long-term, multi-generational suffering.
Right, and I'd say a couple things in response. Big food and big pharma are joined at the hip. For instance, the leading supermarket in Florida used to be called Publix Supermarket. Now it's called Publix Food and Pharmacy. So you get your food at one end of the store, then you go to the other end of the store to get medication to treat symptoms that probably the diet you had from consuming the foods in that store, just made you sick over the long run, or just led to progressive disease. And I think the other thing is, after COVID, um, the last 4 or 5 years, there was actually a poll up at the start of COVID, huge survey. It was about 400,000 people. And I think at the time, 70% of them in that survey said they trusted their doctor. They tried to replicate the survey as best they could about a year ago, and that number was down to 40%. And I think what you're seeing having the people who no longer trust realize they have to take their health into their own hands, and they're coming to the realization that they need to be proactive, finding healthy sources of food, whether it's raw milk or something else. But I think that's just, yeah, a big reason what's happened in the last 5 years, that you're just seeing this boom for foods like raw milk, beef, and the like.
Pete, I get emails, text messages, direct messages, people commenting on my social media about a farm that either they're running or they know about that is under attack by the government. And we saw the Amish and the farmers turn out for this past election in numbers we haven't seen before because of fear that the government is overstepping, and literally coming and culling flocks, dumping products. I mean, the amount of stress on the family farmer in America today is absolutely overwhelming. And many farmers are just throwing up their hands and giving up, which is devastating. It's devastating for our national security. It is devastating for the health and wellness of our communities. Buying locally is going to get harder and harder in many places. It's not looking so good right now. Polyface Farm, so Joel Salatin's farm, recently had pressure around um, vaccinating the chicken flocks. And, it's estimated now over 50 million chickens have been culled in light of the incoming bird flu, pandemic. And um, it seems incredibly aggressive what's happening. Where, what are the best defenses that farmers have right now? And what do we do? What can they do? Who can they call when agencies step foot on their property and start, effectively destroying their business?
Well, there are a couple organizations that I know firsthand can help. One is Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. I mean, they've worked with experts on the science before, as have Weston Price, and I think it's, yeah, now it's more critical than ever. This bird flu has been going on for about 10 months now, and yeah, there's just been no evidence. I mean, recently, raw milk has especially been under attack the last few months. There's no evidence bird flu in raw milk is gonna, um, make anyone, sick, and so this is really part of a larger, agenda to cut access to, some of the healthier foods we have out there, raw milk, beef, and, eggs. Eventually, this might wind up in, court. I mean, the other thing is, you're familiar with the inaccuracies of, the PCR test, and that's their weapon of choice, so to speak, and
And one of the founders of PCR came out and said that PCR was never designed to be used for this kind of testing. There's too many false positives. And what it's trying to pick up is not necessarily an active virus. So you're going to see a lot of these false positive signals flying around that are going to trigger massive and aggressive pandemic response, which we've already seen here in California. The governor signed a emergency order.
what's interesting, Nicole, is there's no consensus on this either. I mean, Weston Price chapter leader, received an email from the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture saying if the PCR test is set above 30 cycles, it's of no value. And then, I think out in California, I know you've had Mark McAfee on, where I think they have it at 35 cycles for the most part. But then you have the USDA, the national lab, they use the National Veterinary I think, safety lab in Iowa, they use 40 cycles, and the FDA has a document where they, say to, test for bird flu, use 45 cycles. There's no consensus at all. I mean, if I understand Mark right, I think even some of the testing they do in California, there should be the PCR test isn't a validation test. There should be some kind of follow-up validation test, and I'm in California, I'm not sure there is. So, there's another agenda here. This isn't about, protecting the public health. I mean, it's been, these bird flu testing has been described as a solution in search of a problem, and that's basically what it's been. It's been 10 months now. There's no evidence raw milk has made anyone sick, and yeah, likewise with just the pastured, poultry operations. And it's actually I've heard as many as 130,000,000 birds have been culled, so I know it's way over 100,000,000. So that's why you're getting all these shortages and just people scrambling for eggs right now.
Of course, that would drive up the cost of eggs. Over 100 million birds have been culled. So, do the math. That's billions of eggs over the year that have gotten taken out of the market.
It's interesting, there's actually an Amish farmer I spoke with about a year ago. He had a cull order, and he refused the order. I mean, basically, with USDA, if one bird is positive, they can order the whole flock to be culled. And he disregard just didn't follow through, didn't obey the cull order, and what happened was he discovered that, it was maybe only certain breeds of chicken that were susceptible, and chicken in a different barn wouldn't be susceptible, so this cull policy is, yeah, complete overreaction to what actually is going on, if there was, in fact, some kind of, public health problem.
There's also a case to be said that there is immunity that can happen through a flock as well. And if we don't allow any immunity to build, that's kind of a greater long-term issue.
Right now in Maryland, they're even, testing producers of raw pet milk because that's in a state like Maryland, that's all you can sell where, it's been proven that the cats can develop, antibodies and, I guess at very in the case of cats, at very high viral loads, there might be fatalities, but there hasn't been any mass die-off. I mean, the fatalities have been few and far between, so it's an overreaction.
Well, I've heard about two cats, and what I didn't hear was whether or not like a full autopsy report was provided if there were any other kind of co-occurring conditions in that cat. But it seems really, really aggressive, what's being done here. And I know that people believe that, well, there's this alternative food agenda. There's this desire to take some of the stuff out of the market. There's even talk that perhaps some of this is intentional to make the American public more sick. I try not to spend too much time thinking about that level of malfeasance because it's unbearable to think that it could be intentional that we're trying to make the American population sick and weak. But let's talk about the structures that are responsible for this culling, because I think if we can work backwards, we can start to identify the source of these ill-conceived policies.
Yeah, I mean, it's mainly, top down. It just sounds like in the case of California, there's been a lot of pressure put on, the state agencies, whether it's the Animal Plant Health and Inspection Service of USDA or FDA. There's being pressure put on, and it's the state's 10th Amendment power to regulate the health, safety, and morals of their people, including, food, and that's just something the feds have increasingly tried to take over through, the financing mechanism. They enter into these cooperative agreements with the state, which often are just an end around on, the state legislature. I mean, they're really creating law and cutting, the state legislature out. So food is something I think, yeah, you want to restore the 10th Amendment power of the states. A big area of that is meat. Basically, the federal law preempts the state law right now. So part of that, in addition to the states taking back their investigatory powers over uh, these so-called outbreaks like bird flu, is just being able to govern independently what happens within their boundaries within meat and poultry processing. So I think, there's a push toward that. You're seeing like this build out of a parallel food system right now. I can tell you, I've just seen states that maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have thought of legalizing raw milk sales, expanding raw milk sales, just legalizing sales from local artisans direct to consumers without regulation. But it's, yeah, there's a push even in the face of these so-called, pandemics like, avian influenza. So, I mean, that's one thing it's encouraging, to see. And I just, I think more and more people are gonna come to the realization that the best food they can get is locally from a producer, whether it's meat producer, dairy farmer, or somebody else. And yeah, it's trying to create the laws so there are enough farmers out there to meet the demand. And of the future commercial farmers, from what I see, are the homesteaders.
Yeah, I love the homesteaders. They're great. And thank God we have the Williamson Act as well, protecting the right to farm on land here in California. And the is there a potential for a state to sue the federal government for overreach related to self governing agriculture?
Well, it's interesting. There was a bill in Wyoming last year, which unfortunately got vetoed. But it basically right now, if you want to sell meat, you have to go to an inspected slaughterhouse, whether it's state inspected or federally inspected. And by inspected, I mean a inspector has to be present when slaughtering and processing it are taking place. So Wyoming had a bill uh, that said you can sell meat where there's no inspector present for slaughtering and processing, and that it's called custom slaughter. And you can sell meat if there's an act of Congress that changes the law, or if there's a favorable court decision in the district Wyoming is located in, the federal court district. So, unfortunately, the governor vetoed the bill, but that might be repeated elsewhere. That type bill, and it's the kind of thing that sets things up where if there is a favorable court decision, because that's more likely than an act of Congress with all the lobbying money from big meat. I think at the federal level, it's something where the law can change right away, and you can go back to selling custom slaughtered meat, which you could do it in this country at one time. For instance, Tom Massey, when he sponsored the Prime Act, which would legalize this on you know, through an act of Congress. Yeah, he was just told there may be a thousand slaughterhouses that have shut down because of the overregulation, because of the federal law, and they would be willing to start up again if something like the Prime Act was passed. So, as far as building out this parallel food system, the most important thing I think is just to get as favorable a regulatory climate as possible. So, it's the states taking back power, it's the feds returning power to the states through laws like the Prime Act. And yeah, it's just a big step toward improving the health and dotting the rural communities with small farms again.
I'm here in California, and actually, I went to a state abattoir slaughterhouse that allowed you to purchase or bring your own animal for slaughter. So if I raised a chicken, I could take it to that state slaughterhouse, and there didn't need to be an inspector or agent there. The guy running the place could just do it on site, and then you would literally take the animal home and prepare it. And it almost felt like it was being run in a way that there's just so much concern and sensitivity around getting shut down because it's one of the few left that can actually operate this way. Um, I've met now farmers that are at farmers markets and they're selling their raw milk and, you know, everybody's on edge. Every farmer, every free, like individual independent food producer is on edge right now. It's almost as if this sense that we're living in this horrible fascist environment where the government is going to come after you or someone's going to leak to the government or it's so bizarre that like our food producers, really good food producers, feel such fear.
In the guise of these pandemics that this campaign is being perpetrated against the small farmers. So when you pass legislation at the state level, there are usually three driving factors. One is freedom of choice. That usually takes priority. The most effective weapon you can have to get any legislation passed is mothers with young kids. I mean, you get them up there. I think the legislators fear them more than any other group. And then there's there's the farmers themselves. How do you improve their? Uh, how can you help them make a better living? And unfortunately, that doesn't get the priority it should. But then there's also the safety issue. I mean, that's one. They're always playing the fear card, and the fear card is just the lack of safety if they aren't regulated. And so there have been a couple interesting FOIA requests on just to take meat for an example, on custom slaughter. There was one USDA FOIA where they said there'd been no illnesses attributed to any custom slaughtered animal for, like an 8-year period. And then Weston Price sent in one, which was over a 12-year period, any on-farm slaughtered animals, any illnesses from that? And the answer came back, 0. So they're trying to make it seem like not having an inspector present is gonna produce a health risk, where just the opposite is true. I mean, if you look at the graphs from the CDC over the last 15, 20 years, thousands of people have gotten sick from inspected meat. There's a small number of slaughterhouses who have over 90%, account for over 90% of the slaughtering, and they're stretched beyond capacity. And the truth is, I think in a lot of cases, it doesn't matter how many inspectors you have there can still be quality control issues. I mean, there are poultry slaughterhouses, I've been told, that slaughter 500,000 birds a day, several million a week. How can you have quality control when that's going on? And, this isn't any offense to the USDA inspectors who have a thankless job, but the truth is, if you have a choice of obtaining custom meat, and if you don't know the plant it was processed in or the farmer, or choice of obtaining USDA inspected meat where you don't know the plant was processed in or the farmer, just the odds are, the record shows that chances the safer meat likely is going to be the custom meat, the so-called uninspected meat, meaning no inspector was there when slaughtering was taking place.
I'm just thinking to myself how I'm going to get up and go make a big donation to that Farmer Defense Fund. How are the lawyers there? What is that organization like?
Yeah, basically, its goal is to protect the right to obtain the food of your choice for the source of your choice. It tries to protect the right of farmers and consumers to engage in direct commerce. Um, what they're mainly doing these days is if they have a member whose case they agree to take on, they will just contact a local attorney. They have an attorney network,
Oh, they
and
do.
so
Great.
yeah, the attorney will take it on. I don't know if it's in all 50 states, but it's in, quite a few. And there are states like Michigan where you get more litigation, yeah, than others. But yeah, I mean, Legal Defense Fund has litigated a number of cases in California back in the day, represented, Mark McAfee and, yeah, some of the other, producers there.
Are you guys attracting young attorneys? Because I went through law school. I didn't see a single young person saying, I'm going to go out there and defend farmers when I become a lawyer.
Well, right. Yeah. So I don't work for the Legal Defense Fund anymore. I'm just a consultant for Weston Price. But I think there are some idealistic attorneys who, yeah, who are interested. I've talked with some. I wish there were more, because there's not a lot of money in this area. You get more money working as a corporate counsel for Kraft Heinz or, yeah, some other major food manufacturer.
Well, I have to say we're living in the age of the activist judge, right? And or the activist attorney who is for hire to be a quote activist for these social causes. And as I look closer at what their causes are, it makes me very concerned. None of the causes are really for food, water, children's health. It's for honestly, it's for this like very narrow-minded woke ideology and political ideology as well. We're seeing a lot of recruitment, and when I say we're, like, I have personally seen a lot of recruitment in the law schools for activists, young, you know, clerks who will be the next set of activist young judges. And so
Right.
that pipeline. Medical freedom has started to get better lawyers. Folks like Aaron Siri and his firm have been instrumental in the medical freedom fight. And that's in part because the families impacted are willing to spend money, right? They're just like, you hurt my child. I'm going to spend money on this. Now, food freedom, it really sounds like there needs to be a coming together of the families who deeply want to access that food. So the market who wants access to that food. And then the farmers themselves need support to defend themselves. And I think that's where this fund, this legal defense fund that you've been a part of, is so key and paramount. Um, it, I think the challenge is we are missing the consumer groups who really want to go out there and have these fights. I know glyphosate has been a very interesting legal field because of the fact that glyphosate injuries are so significant. The case law around them is pretty well established. Um, but that's an input. That's a very specific input injury, right? With a company behind it, the Roundup company that now Bayer owns, and they purchased from Monsanto.
Bear purchase Monsanto. Right.
So the issue that we're in, just from a financial incentives standpoint, is that right now we don't know who can bring those causes of action forward against the government, because really it's the government that is infiltrating this issue. It's and behind it is, clearly the special interests that are pushing the government to shut down small family farms and regulate them out of existence. But that's all in the shadows. So we can't go after those companies because those are backdoor deals and backdoor agreements. But we can identify different agencies that we can bring suits against. And I'm sure that there's a whole category of laws that can be invoked to protect these farmers, because we can't just go through legislation. I feel like we're on this constant hamster wheel to nowhere trying to go through legislation.
Yeah, it's more of a piecemeal approach. With raw milk, I think it's worked. Uh, when Weston Price started up, I think it was 27 states that had legalized raw milk through sales for human consumption, sales for pet consumption, or what's known as a herd share agreement, where someone doesn't buy the milk but purchases an ownership interest in a cow and can get milk through that. So today that's at 47. It's just this attack through bird flu is something the raw milk movement really hasn't faced before. So yeah, it's a different kind of tactic. Um, I agree with you. I think, what we're looking for is a court decision that, first of all, there is a legal distinction between the public distribution of food, whether you're going to a supermarket, and the private distribution of food, just going direct to the farm, getting food from a farmer. Because, initially in this country, that wasn't regulated at all. There were problems with the dairy industry moving into the cities. People were getting sick there. The meat industry, same thing. Just and what happened was these farmers who weren't getting anyone sick, the small farmers just selling direct to their customers, were dragged in to this regulatory net that developed through the creation of FDA, USDA over 100 years ago. So, and they started primarily because of raw milk. So one thing they did, I mean, in the beginning, they litigated mostly raw milk cases, but what they did was they would, even if, and this is a credit to Gary Cox, the general counsel, even if the fact pattern was terrible, we'd still take on the case. Because there are really 4 different ways you can win a case. One is a court decision. One is, getting the case to jumpstart the legislative process, and that actually happened in California about 15 years ago. They had the CDFA got, this, testing requirement passed where the raw milk dairies in the state mark, and there was just 1 or 2 other dairies at the time weren't aware of it. And, so they got one bill passed. So Mark, through the legal defense fund, filed a lawsuit, and eventually they had a bill introduced that would have, yeah, taken care of the issue with the coliform testing requirement. It got to the governor's desk and Schwarzenegger vetoed it. But that's another way, jumpstarting the legislative process, jumpstarting the rulemaking that happened in Texas. They had several raids which, the farmers were able to get legal defense there. And eventually, the Department of Health, which regulates raw milk in Texas, just approached some of the leaders there in the raw milk movement and, yeah, just promulgated regulations, which were basically as good as a bill. But what most often happens is, at least it did with us, where you the lawsuit, causes the, uh, agency or bureaucracy to change their enforcement policy or their interpretation of the law. That's, a lot it's temporarily buying time in a sense, but a lot of times that'll get, uh, the bureaucracy off of farmers' back. Because the bottom line is whether you wanna keep the farmer in business. You might not always win the case, but you can still keep him in business. There was one particular case I remember where it was a state where you could only sell milk or raw milk or cheese. This farmer had demand from his customers for other raw dairy products, and so he made those, and eventually the state, um, yeah, shut him down. It went to court. The state won, slam dunk,
Mhm.
both administrative level and, judicial level, but the guy kept on making the product, and I think one of the reasons was, the state just weighed and they knew he was making the product, and he never got anyone sick. It was healthy food, giving it to his customers, but they left him alone, I think, because they realized an organization like the Legal Defense Fund was gonna be there if they went after him again, and was it worth their expenditure of resources? And, they decided no. So that's the kind of thing where, you can, effectuate, change. It might not be on the law books, but, what's more important than the law itself is the enforcement of the law, and if they're not enforcing a law, um, yeah, I mean, these, like, you know just the mothers with young children, if they realize a food like raw milk is gonna help, their kids, they don't care what the law says. The Legal Defense Fund actually had a lawsuit against FDA challenging the interstate ban. And FDA just said, if we're not going to go after individuals crossing state lines to get raw milk, and there are other arenas you can fight besides, so you can try and and you can coordinate this. You can all do this at the same time while a court case is going on. You could try and introduce legislation. I mean, that doesn't always work, but it can. And then, or you can go to the agency, and try and get them to start rulemaking. But the one area you always have to be active in is the court of public opinion. I mean, yeah, you especially need to coordinate that with litigation. And when you do that right, yeah, you're just increasing the chances that the agency is just gonna say, "Okay, no one's getting sick in this case, so we're not gonna spend the resources on it."
And, Pete, here's where I really scratch my head with the actions of the regulators. We still have um, tort law in which a consumer who has been affected by a product can sue the manufacturer of that product,
Right,
correct? So there are defenses that set, I mean, not defenses, but there's a whole legal um, infrastructure that protects the consumer, which incentivizes the producer to produce clean and safe products.
right.
The incentive structure is there commercially. Our private markets provide them. Our Department of Justice provides that checks and balance. The regulators coming in and trying to do these blanket regulations to prevent the spread of foodborne illness, you know, it seems to me that the risk reward doesn't make sense because the risk is you put these good producers out of business and you increase the price of food, which is what the regulators are doing right now. So if we defunded the regulators, that could be another avenue as well. I know Doge is looking at all these agencies and trying to figure out where to make cuts because our government is so in debt. We have runaway debt. It seems to me that cutting the funds to the regulators that are regulating the small producers could be something that could be a win-win for everybody.
I've always thought that. I just think when you get a law like the Food Safety Modernization Act, I mean, I think the underlying purpose of those act is to consolidate control of the food system. I mean, that's what happened with the Wholesome Meat Act, which gave us the meat regulatory system we have today. At the time that act was passed, I mean, I've seen a congressional report that said meat was a competitive industry, and now you have four companies controlling maybe 85 percent of the market. It's not a food safety issue. It's an industry consolidation under the guise of food safety.
Where are the antitrust people?
Well, that's it. The antitrust laws aren't enforced in this country, at least in the food sector that I've seen. I mean, it's interesting. I think it was 1970, there were 600,000 dairies in this country, and today it's less than 25,000. I don't think they're including the raw milk dairies. These are just the grade A dairies, the dairies that produce milk for pasteurization. And most of these dairy farmers don't have the resources to have their own bottling plants and pasteurization plants where they don't have to sell their milk to a co-op. And in some of these states, I think, yeah, Dairy Farmers of America is like the only game in town. Either you sell to them or you're not in business. Like everything else in the country, the different sectors of the food and agriculture have gotten more and more consolidated.
Well, I will tell you that retail markets that were once carrying raw dairy here in California are refusing to carry it in light of the bird flu fear mongering that's been going on. I know that it's becoming harder. It's like going back to the days where there was no raw dairy at all available. I mean, it's really hard to find, and it's frustrating and it's scary, because many families won't touch the pasteurized stuff because they can't digest it. It makes them sick. It flares up GI issues and colic and all kinds of horrible illnesses. So that means that sensitive populations can't get the product they need.
Right, and so you've seen the problem with the California raw milk law. It's so expensive to get licensed to meet the cost of compliance so you can get licensed. There may be only a half a dozen licensed dairies in the state, and Raw Farm is the biggest dairy by far. They were suspended for 6 weeks, and
Over $1 million.
you couldn't get any, legal raw milk there. It was even worse back in the day, 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, there was, it was Organic Pastures at that time in, Clairville. They might have been the only 2 licensed dairies in the state. And I knew, someone who kind of tried to did a survey, figure out as best he could, and he said there were 5, he counted by his count, there were around 500 dairies on the black market just, selling milk, and that's what's gonna happen again. You just have to deregulate to the point where, some of these smaller dairies have to, are able to, sell.
Yeah, it's the best stuff. Well, and the retailers, what is worse, the worst case for these companies like Raw, is that they can't get to the retailers if the retailers are refusing to sell the product. And their entire business relies on retailers. So the grocery stores that buy the product that then sell it to their consumers. Um, these, sweeping public policy statements that raw milk is dangerous is really like it is effectively killing the the ability for consumers to access this product, even if the product is still illegal.
Well, what's interesting, Nicole, is, all the fear mongering hasn't driven demand for raw milk down at all. It's just with the regulators and the state legislators that are, falling prey to the fear mongering. And in a state like California, yeah, we they really need to deregulate, get more small farms a chance to come on. I mean, the farm you'd like to see is just a diversified farm which sells milk, meat, produce, eggs.
That would be probably the safest way to get milk is to go directly to the farm itself where the milk is quickly chilled from the cow and you can get it in your refrigerator right away versus it passing through so many hands and so many layers of bureaucracy and different swabs and lab tests and PCR tests. I mean, we know that a healthy cow produces healthy milk and that the bad pathogens don't survive in that milk.
Yeah, there's a saying that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, and that's what the public health people have often done with raw milk. I mean, they come up with some study, quote un yeah, study, the word is in quotation marks, just saying, raw milk is 800 times more likely to get someone sick than, pasteurized milk when, the truth is, especially recently, I think in recent years, it's kinda hard to, wrap your mind around because as the demand for raw milk is going up, there actually been some years where the CDC numbers I've looked at where the number of illnesses is either flat or actually going down. So it's something that, can be, produced, safely. It's a live food, so some people who, have compromised immune systems and try and start drinking it might be better to just try a little at a time. I know a doctor who would prescribe it to his patients, and he'd start out maybe 4 ounces at a time, go to 8 ounces, and take it from there.
Microdosing the good raw milk.
Yeah, it's an amazing, health food. It's one of the foods that can get you outside, get you out of the medical system.
I've seen it with my own eyes too. Well, again, I personally think that a lot of this argument is about choice. If people want their pastured milk, great. If people want their raw milk, great. We've got to make it available and we need to have a fair and balanced system so that people can really freely choose as consumers as well.
Right. It's just there's so many issues right now, the cost of farmland for farmers, for people who wanna start a dairy, just the national herd, I think, is as low as it's been over 60 years, so there are not enough cows out there. Yeah, the regulatory system is making it tougher for farmers to start up, but these are all solvable. I mean, you can do, something about any of these things, so
I mean, the regulators are driving up the cost of real food to a point where people cannot afford real food anymore. That's fundamentally the issue, too. So I think that if people are really thinking hard about inflation, you cannot ignore this issue of overregulated farmers.
and this country has been run on this cheap food, high healthcare cost paradigm for a long time. And, there are more and more people who are shifting away from it, but it's still, if you take the two food systems, the industrial food system and the local food system, which is, just growing by leaps and bounds now, it's still, the industrial food system might have 98 cents of the food dollar right now. So there's a lot of positive change that can happen. I think the other thing is with the industrial food system, the margins for so many of these businesses are so tight that, just a shift wouldn't take that great a shift to the local food system of shifting of food dollars to, really get some people away from some of the more harmful foods and towards more healthy food.
Well, Pete, thank you for your time. I'm going to get up from my seat and go and make a big donation to the Legal Defense Fund for Farmers and get on the line with Sally as well and see how else I can help with this effort. I had no idea that's who is behind your journey. I'd only heard about your work. If you if you have cases that you want to highlight or things you want to advocate for, cases you'd like to advocate for, please do send it my way because the Maha movement is fully, fully behind this.
Yeah, better times ahead.
I sure hope so. And, we're going to be trying to work with the USDA under Brooke Rollins too. She passed her confirmation with flying colors, which actually makes me nervous.
Yeah, she doesn't have, I mean, her working career hasn't really been spent in agriculture that much, so, maybe she hasn't fallen under the spell of big ag, so there's that hope that, yeah, she'll work with RFK and try and, just get the regenerative agriculture to get more of a foothold in, the country.
Yeah, and get regulators like off the necks of these poor family farmers.
Right.
Dear God, we've got to help our farmers out.
These small farms are, the low-hanging fruit for the regulators because the big ag companies can just lawyer up and make it, more difficult for them, but there are a lot of things they can, regulate. A lot of these imported food.
The imported junk stuff that's sprayed and, created with horrible labor standards that we have no insight into. Come on. Like, our regulators are completely picking on the wrong people.
Right. Yeah, it's just time to, deregulate, and at the local level, just no regulation. Let it go. It's like you said, if you make somebody sick, you might be out, your business and, your farm.
Yeah, exactly. The incentives are already there. Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you for all the work you've done over your career on this issue. And we hope to see more from you and see more lawyers following in your footsteps. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nicole. It's been an honor to be on.